The 1970s gave us some of the wildest science fiction ever made. But here's the twist. Many of those movies completely tanked when they first hit theaters. Audiences laughed, critics rolled their eyes, and studios lost money. Yet decades later, these so-called disasters look more like misunderstood masterpieces. What went wrong? Were they too smart, too weird, or just too far ahead of their time? Let's dive into 15 sci-fi flops from the 70s that turned out to be secretly great. Silent Running, 1970. On paper, Silent Running sounded like a small miracle. Universal Pictures backing a film directed by Douglas Trumbull, the special effects genius behind 2001: A Space Odyssey. But instead of space battles or alien threats, audiences got Bruce Dern as a lonely botanist guarding Earth's last forests inside giant space domes. His companions? A few endearing drones nicknamed Huey, Dewey, and Louie. It was an ecological fable wrapped in a melancholic tone, released at a time when studios wanted spectacle. The box office crash wasn't shocking. Viewers expecting action were blindsided by a meditative story about loneliness, morality, and the destruction of nature. Critics were split. Some admired its daring sincerity, while others dismissed it as preachy and slow. The soundtrack, filled with Joan Baez's haunting folk songs, only made the film feel more unusual in an era leaning toward flashy space operas. But here's the thing. Silent Running aged into something remarkable. Its environmental themes feel eerily modern, and its practical effects still impress. Bruce Dern's performance, raw and heartbreaking, gives the movie its soul. Today, it's celebrated as one of the first truly ecological science fiction films, inspiring generations of filmmakers and even influencing later hits like Wall-E. It was a flop in '72, but history rebranded it as visionary. Zardoz, 1974. Few images from the 1970s are as infamous as Sean Connery strutting around in a red bandolier, thigh-high boots, and almost nothing else. Zardoz, directed by John Boorman, looked absurd even in its own time. Audiences didn't know what to make of it, and critics shredded it as pretentious nonsense. Financially, it sank like a stone. Yet under the surface, Zardoz was something else entirely. This was Boorman swinging for the fences with an allegory about immortality, class division, and the futility of utopia. The exterminators who killed at the command of a giant floating head called Zardoz may sound laughable, but it was a biting satire of power and control. Connery, fresh off James Bond, deliberately took the role to escape his typecasting. It didn't work commercially, but it proved he was willing to risk his image. Over time, cinephiles started looking past the ridiculous costumes and realized Boorman had made a psychedelic dystopia that dared to be different. Its surreal imagery, dreamlike pacing, and philosophical undertones now place it in the cult classic Hall of Fame. What was once mocked for being silly is now admired for being fearless. Zardoz is proof that sometimes the strangest failures grow into the boldest legacies. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. Imagine a teenage Don Johnson wandering a post-apocalyptic wasteland with his telepathic dog, scavenging food and dodging danger. That's the bizarre world of A Boy and His Dog. Released in 1975 and based on Harlan Ellison's novella, the film mixed dark comedy with bleak survivalist science fiction. Not exactly popcorn material for a Saturday night crowd. Audiences didn't know how to respond. Some critics admired its audacity, while others called it grim, disturbing, and off-putting. Its limited release didn't help. The movie never had the marketing muscle to reach a wide audience, and its bleak ending left those who saw it unsettled. Financially, it barely made a dent. But if you watch it today, A Boy and His Dog feels ahead of its time. Its depiction of a scorched wasteland influenced a generation of post-apocalyptic storytelling, including the Mad Max franchise. Don Johnson delivers a scrappy, unpolished performance that fits the tone perfectly, and the film's twisted humor gives it a unique flavor no studio would dare try today. Its mixture of cynicism and imagination has helped it endure as a cult treasure. What was dismissed as too harsh in 1975 now looks like one of the most influential visions of the wasteland ever filmed. Phase 4, 1974. An army of ants as the next great movie monsters? That was the gamble taken by Phase 4, directed by legendary graphic designer Saul Bass. Unlike typical creature features, this wasn't about oversized bugs terrorizing small towns. Instead, Bass envisioned a chilling tale of hyper-intelligent ants evolving into a collective force capable of outsmarting humans. Audiences expected a cheesy B-movie, and instead got a slow, cerebral, and unsettling story drenched in surreal imagery. Unsurprisingly, the box office collapsed. Critics had no idea how to categorize it. Too strange for mainstream crowds, too pulpy for highbrow sci-fi fans. Its odd pacing and eerie tone guaranteed commercial failure. Yet film historians now view Phase 4 as a one-of-a-kind experiment. The macro photography of ants looks astonishingly real, giving the story a disturbing authenticity. The film's original ending, long thought lost but recently rediscovered, revealed Bass's true intent. A symbolic, abstract meditation on humanity merging with nature. That was far too much for 1974 audiences, but decades later it's recognized as art disguised as pulp. It bombed back then. But today it's hailed as one of the most daring eco-sci-fi visions of its era. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. David Bowie was already a rock icon when Nicholas Roeg cast him in The Man Who Fell to Earth, playing an alien who arrives on Earth seeking water for his dying planet. Bowie embodied otherworldliness so completely it barely felt like acting. The film, however, left audiences baffled. Released in 1976, it crashed hard at the box office, with critics calling it incoherent, strange, and overly experimental. The problem wasn't lack of ambition, it was excess. Roeg used fractured editing, non-linear storytelling, and surreal visuals to create a disorienting narrative. What some saw as artistic brilliance, most viewers saw as confusing nonsense. The movie never found its footing commercially, and Bowie's star power wasn't enough to save it. But here's the twist. In hindsight, the film feels like a perfect snapshot of the decade's anxieties, corporate greed, addiction, and alienation. Bowie's haunted performance became iconic, and the movie has been reappraised as a bold exploration of what happens when an outsider collides with human corruption. Its influence can be seen in later works that explore alienation with a poetic edge. Once written off as a mess, The Man Who Fell to Earth now stands as a hypnotic, visionary classic that simply arrived before audiences were ready. Westworld, 1973. Before HBO turned Westworld into a prestige television juggernaut, Michael Crichton wrote and directed the original 1973 film. The premise was irresistible, a futuristic theme park where guests could live out fantasies with lifelike robots, cowboys, sword fights, gladiators. It was a playground for the rich. But then, the robots started malfunctioning, and the fantasy turned into a nightmare. Sounds like a hit, right? Not exactly. MGM released it to middling box office numbers and lukewarm reviews. Audiences didn't quite know what to make of a sci-fi thriller that didn't lean on flashy effects or traditional heroes. Critics were intrigued but not enthusiastic, calling it cold and underdeveloped. The studio had hoped for a breakout hit but got a modest return instead, so the movie was quietly shelved in the public's memory. Over the decades, though, Westworld gained a second life. Yul Brynner's chilling performance as the unstoppable gunslinger, a robotic cowboy with a blank stare and relentless pursuit, became iconic. The film's exploration of artificial intelligence, corporate greed, and the dangers of unchecked technology proved far more prescient than anyone realized. It was one of the earliest films to seriously tackle what happens when machines stop following human commands. What once looked like a minor curiosity is now recognized as a groundbreaking sci-fi thriller that influenced everything from The Terminator to Jurassic Park. Sometimes being too early is as deadly as being wrong. Damnation Alley, 1977. In the wake of Star Wars, 20th Century Fox desperately wanted another science fiction franchise. Their great hope was Damnation Alley, a post-apocalyptic road trip based on Roger Zelazny's novel. On paper, it had it all. Mutant creatures, armored landmaster vehicles, and a journey across a ruined America. But production problems plagued the shoot, and by the time it reached theaters in 1977, it was overshadowed by, you guessed it, George Lucas's galaxy far, far away. Audiences expecting something slick were met with rough special effects, uneven storytelling, and a tone that shifted wildly between camp and seriousness. Critics didn't hold back, calling it a disaster. Financially, it was crushed under the weight of Star Wars, which had already set a new gold standard for sci-fi entertainment. Damnation Alley wasn't just a flop, it was considered an embarrassment for Fox. But with time, the film developed cult appeal. The Landmaster vehicle, with its massive wheels and tank-like design, became a fan favorite, even appearing in other productions. The film's bizarre mutants, cheesy charm, and patchwork world-building gave it a strange allure. Today, it's remembered less as a failed blockbuster and more as a fascinating relic of a studio scrambling to catch lightning in a bottle. It bombed hard in 1977, but for fans of oddball post-apocalyptic adventures, Damnation Alley is a road trip worth taking. Logan's Run, 1976. Released a year before Star Wars, Logan's Run was MGM's attempt to create a major sci-fi event film. It had dazzling sets, groundbreaking special effects, and a high-concept premise. In a utopian future, everyone lives in pleasure until they hit 30, at which point they're killed in a ritual known as carousel. When a law enforcer named Logan discovers the truth, he becomes a fugitive. Despite its ambition, the film underperformed at the box office. It wasn't a total financial disaster, but given its hefty budget and MGM's desperate need for a hit, it was seen as a disappointment. Critics found the film uneven, praised for its visuals but criticized for clunky dialogue and melodramatic acting. Audiences were intrigued but didn't flock to it in the numbers the studio expected. And yet, Logan's Run refused to fade. Its world building, complete with domed cities and eerie rituals, left a lasting impression. The film's mix of spectacle and dystopian dread helped pave the way for the explosion of sci-fi in the late 70s and 80s. It even inspired a short-lived TV series. Today, it's celebrated as a cult classic with an irresistible premise that still feels ripe for modern reinterpretation. What once felt like a misfire now stands as one of the quintessential sci-fi visions of the 70s. Quintet, 1979. By the late 1970s, director Robert Altman was known for ensemble dramas like MASH and Nashville, so when he decided to make a sci-fi film, expectations were high. Quintet, starring Paul Newman, was set in a frozen future where humanity is on the brink of extinction, and society revolves around a strange, deadly board game. The concept was ambitious, but audiences weren't ready for such a bleak, abstract vision. When it opened in 1979, it was a commercial and critical disaster. Viewers found it slow, confusing, and overly symbolic. Newman's star power wasn't enough to bring crowds in, and critics complained that Altman's usual brilliance at capturing human interactions was smothered by the film's heavy-handed allegory. Instead of a thrilling sci-fi story, audiences felt like they were watching an art project gone wrong. But for those who stuck with it, Quintet offered something rare. The desolate, frozen landscapes, shot in Canada during brutal winter conditions, created an unforgettable atmosphere. Its themes of futility, survival, and obsession with games resonate more now, in an era obsessed with competition and distraction. Though still divisive, it has developed a niche following among fans of experimental sci-fi. Altman didn't deliver a crowd pleaser, but he did craft one of the most unique and haunting films of the decade. Sometimes the weirdest experiments leave the deepest marks. The Black Hole, 1979. Disney in the late 1970s wasn't the powerhouse it is today. Desperate to cash in on the Star Wars craze, the studio poured money into The Black Hole, a space adventure about a starship crew discovering a massive vessel orbiting a black hole, led by a mad scientist played by Maximilian Schell. With cutting-edge special effects and an epic scope, it was Disney's most expensive film to date. But the gamble didn't pay off. Critics were confused by its dark tone, which clashed with Disney's family-friendly image. Audiences expecting a lighthearted romp got a moody, philosophical space opera that ended in surreal, borderline nightmarish imagery. While it earned back some of its budget, it was widely seen as a disappointment and failed to kickstart the franchise Disney had hoped for. In hindsight, The Black Hole feels fascinatingly bold. Its visuals, particularly the haunting shots of the black hole itself, still impress. The film's willingness to embrace darkness and ambiguity was ahead of its time, foreshadowing the more mature direction sci-fi would take in the 1980s. Today, it's a cult classic, loved for its eerie atmosphere and ambitious mix of family film trappings with unsettling cosmic horror. What once baffled Disney fans now stands as one of the studio's most daring missteps. THX 1138 1971. Before Star Wars made him a household name, George Lucas delivered THX 1138, a sterile, haunting vision of a future where individuality is crushed and humans are reduced to numbers. Produced with help from Francis Ford Coppola, it was Lucas's first feature film, but mainstream audiences in 1971 didn't know what to make of it. Cold, minimalist, and filled with eerie silences, it felt more like an experimental art piece than a popcorn sci-fi adventure. Warner Brothers expected a commercially viable science fiction film, but what they got was a meditation on conformity, freedom, and control. The box office returns were dismal. Critics were divided, and Lucas himself admitted the studio butchered his cut before release. At the time, it seemed like a misfire from a young filmmaker whose ambitions outstripped his storytelling. But over the years, THX 1138 has been reappraised as a visionary debut. Its design, endless white corridors, faceless guards, and oppressive soundscapes still feels strikingly modern. Robert Duvall's subdued performance as THX, a man rebelling against enforced conformity, resonates with anyone who's ever felt trapped by system or routine. Lucas would later revise the film in the director's cut, restoring lost elements and enhancing its scope. What was once a cold flop is now seen as a daring piece of sci-fi minimalism that proved George Lucas wasn't just chasing spectacle, he was already thinking about the machinery of power. Capricorn One, 1977. Long before conspiracy theories became internet fuel, Capricorn One tapped into public paranoia about space travel. Directed by Peter Hyams, it tells the story of a faked Mars landing orchestrated by NASA to protect its reputation. When the astronauts refuse to play along, they find themselves hunted by their own government. With a cast featuring James Brolin, Sam Waterston, and O.J. Simpson, the film looked like a sure hit, but it wasn't. Released in 1977, the same year as Star Wars, the film was drowned out by that cultural tidal wave. Critics shrugged at its pacing, calling it too slow for a thriller. Financially, it underwhelmed, falling far short of blockbuster status. Audiences simply weren't in the mood for a paranoid conspiracy thriller in the same season that gave them lightsabers and Death Stars. Yet, Capricorn One aged well. Its themes of government deception and media manipulation feel startlingly relevant today. The desert chase sequences remain thrilling, and Jerry Goldsmith's tense score elevates the drama. For those willing to revisit it, the film offers an eerily plausible look at how institutions protect their image at any cost. Dismissed in '77, it's now admired as one of the boldest attempts to inject real-world suspicion into science fiction. Sometimes, timing makes all the difference between forgotten and unforgettable. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. Adapted from Michael Crichton's novel, The Andromeda Strain promised to be a cerebral, scientifically grounded thriller. The story follows a team of scientists racing to contain an alien microorganism that wipes out an entire town. No space battles, no heroic pilots, just sterile labs, claustrophobic tension, and slow-burn suspense. Audiences didn't quite bite. While not a financial disaster on the level of some other films, it underperformed given its production costs and prestige marketing push. Critics respected its attention to detail, but complained it was too clinical, too cold, and too devoid of emotion. At a time when audiences craved adventure and escapism, the Andromeda Strain felt more like a textbook come to life. But time has been kind. Today, it's hailed as a landmark in realistic science fiction. Its meticulous production design, use of split screens, and procedural storytelling feel decades ahead of their time. The movie influenced later works like Outbreak and Contagion, and its themes of scientific responsibility are more relevant than ever. What once seemed too dry now feels chillingly authentic. The alien threat wasn't a monster with claws, it was something microscopic and invisible. In the long run, the Andromeda Strain proved that sometimes the quietest disasters leave the loudest echoes. Soylent Green, 1973. When people hear the title Soylent Green, they immediately think of its famous twist. But back in 1973, audiences weren't exactly racing to theaters. MGM expected a major hit with Charlton Heston headlining, yet the movie's grim vision of an overpopulated future struggling with pollution and poverty didn't click with mainstream crowds. Critics were lukewarm, calling it heavy-handed, and the box office returns were far below expectations. The studio had hoped to ride the wave of dystopian thrillers, but the film's slow pace and bleakness turned away audiences seeking more adventure. Instead of a flashy sci-fi spectacle, they got a warning about climate collapse, class inequality, and dwindling resources. Not exactly Saturday night fun. Yet over time, Soylent Green became one of the decade's defining sci-fi films. Its central reveal shocked audiences and entered pop culture permanently, but its lasting power lies in its relevance. Today, its portrayal of environmental collapse and social breakdown feels eerily close to reality. Charlton Heston gives one of his most human performances, especially in the heartbreaking final scenes with Edward G. Robinson. Initially brushed off as gloomy and clumsy, Soylent Green is now remembered as a sci-fi classic that dared to be brutally honest about humanity's future. Rollerball, 1975. What happens when the only sport left in the future is a violent bloodbath designed to keep the masses docile? That's the premise of Rollerball, starring James Caan as a star player caught between personal glory and a system determined to crush individualism. With its brutal, futuristic sport, slick production design, and corporate dystopia storyline, it looked like a surefire hit. Instead, it confused audiences and critics alike. Some called it shallow and overblown. Others dismissed it as too violent to be taken seriously. At the box office, it performed modestly, but fell short of blockbuster expectations, earning the dreaded disappointment label. The mixture of social commentary and bone-crunching action didn't fit neatly into any box, so it was left to languish in cult obscurity. Decades later, though, Rollerball feels prophetic. Its warnings about corporations controlling entertainment and suppressing individuality ring louder now than ever. The action sequences, especially the rollerball matches themselves, are still intense and visceral. James Caan's stoic, simmering performance grounds the spectacle in humanity. While critics once saw it as muddled, modern audiences recognize it as one of the sharpest satires of the decade. It failed to capture hearts in 1975, but in hindsight, Rollerball wasn't a mess. It was a message. So there you have it, 15 sci-fi films from the 1970s that bombed when they landed but soared years later. Each one proves that a flop in the moment doesn't mean failure forever. Sometimes it takes decades for audiences to catch up to bold ideas. Which of these forgotten gems do you think deserves even more love? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe for more hidden history, and remember, every so-called failure might just be waiting for its second chance.